If you can see the presentation, please can you let me know in the chat that you can see my presentation slides. I'll just take a look at the chat now. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so let's begin. Yeah, so full screen. Yeah, so welcome to um our taster session. So we'll be looking at um what will be expected of anyone basically who wants to go forward in 2026 as a cloud engineer or a DevOps engineer. So I'll begin by saying welcome. So go to the next slide. So the agenda for today is pretty short anyways. I'll give a brief overview about, us, who we are, why we've decided to organize this session and, the subsequent ones we have planned already. And for the purpose of this data session, I'll be covering two scenarios. So one scenario will cater to people with like zero experience or newbies. I think several people indicated they haven't got any experience in cloud engineering. And I think one person did say they have some level of experience, but it's under between 1 and 2 years. And I think we have an experienced person as well. So I'll be going through a scenario and then we'll have questions and answer, and then we'll try and connect more with each other. All right, so who are we? We are basically a tech ed and training startup. We've just started, and the team, there are three of us in the team right now. So myself, yeah, my name is Chris. You can call me Dr. Chris. I'm a senior cloud specialist, and I work on one of the UK, government agency projects, a very big project for that matter. And then we have Mr. Victor as well, who is a senior DevOps engineer. Um, in subsequent sessions, we'll hear from him. Then we have Ms. Grace as well, who's basically looking after our social media, comms and all. So, besides the three of us, we also have access to a team of industry experts who are also, senior, cloud engineer, lead cloud engineer. I think we also have someone who is quite higher up in the management as well. So I think with time we'll get to meet them as well. So the reason why we decided to put together, this event is basically to empower, students and professionals to achieve um, three or four of the following. So competitive salaries. This was actually one of my goals as well. Um, as you may well know, I have a doctorate degree, but not in cloud computing. But I've been able to transition over to cloud computing, and as a result, get better pay, more competitive salaries, and also when you transition into tech, you'll experience, a work-life balance. You'll be able to work remotely. You'll be able to, negotiate, better, working conditions, at your own terms, while also considering, the terms of the employer as well. And also, I remember when I was trying to transition into tech. I think that's probably almost 10 years now. Um, I do know there's a lot of noise in the cloud space, and what would be very helpful, or what would have been helpful for me, is to, you know, find somebody who can basically hold me by the hand to say, okay, forget the noise. These are the things you need to focus on, to be able to land a job with, very competitive salaries. And then, sorry, let me hide this. Yeah, so basically, my goal is to be able to, you know, show people the actual skill they need. And there's so much noise, so much, shiny technologies, but they're just really, a small subset of skills which, cloud engineers and DevOps engineers, actually need to be able to, you know, do their day-to-day job and to be able to, land, the roles, that they hope they will. And so, does anyone have any question? Let me check the chat to see if there are any questions for me before I proceed. If you have any questions at this point, please um, you can enter it in the chat and I can answer them. If not, I'll proceed to the next slide. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions, so I'll progress to the next slide. So back to full screen. So I've prepared a scenario for um, people with little to no experience. So basically, my aim is to sort of, you know, introduce the kind of things you would be expected to know when you start your journey as a cloud or DevOps engineer. So in this case, I've picked a scenario, that revolves around, um, you know, a government project. Um, but there are basically other relevant scenarios as well. So imagine that you've just been hired as a cloud engineer by you know let's say a consultancy to work on a government project, and um, they've just said to you, okay, welcome, we're happy to have you in our team, um, please take this laptop. You'll be doing all your work using this laptop. It could be either Mac or Windows laptop. And then the question is, what should you do? So I think I'll take a pause here. So let me get some comments, so I can understand, what we have in mind. What do you think a young junior cloud engineer should do in this scenario? They've just had this laptop. What are the sort of tasks that we expected to do right away? So I'll just switch back to to the live chat to see if there are any comments. Please leave a comment in the chat and let's make this session interactive. So, what do you think the young junior, newly employed cloud engineer should do? Yeah, that sounds, yeah, that's very reasonable. They need to set up the laptop. Does anyone else want to put a comment? It doesn't have to be. I mean, we're not looking at right or wrong answers. We just want to see, where everyone's mind is at. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Everyone looks like we're all going in the right direction. Any more comments? I'm sorry, I can't see your name, so I can only see your names when I look at the chat. I can see Toby is here, Salubrious is here. I think Olatunde is here as well. I think I agree. Yeah, Randy is here as well. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I think that's the next step. The cloud engineer should do. You have this laptop, brand new laptop. That's where all the work would all happen. So they need to set up the laptop. So I'll go back to my presentation slides. So we set it back to full screen, and I'll just cycle through. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah. So they expected to set up their laptop, but the question is what does it mean? How should we set up this laptop in such a way that will be better positioned to do the job more effectively? And then so I've listed a couple of points that I think I'll talk about. And then if you have any questions, you can drop in the comments and I'll respond as well. So the first step I think in my mind will be to install the package manager. So what I mean is there are basically two kinds of things you would have. So you either have a Mac or a Windows machine. And if you're given a Mac machine, you'd want to install um, Brew or Homebrew. Or if you have a Windows machine, you'll need to install Choco. And these are quite easy to install. You can just these days there's ChatGPT, that can actually give you the commands. So if you're not familiar with ChatGPT, you can just go online how to install, Choco or Homebrew. For example, so this is what I mean. If I just switch, I can just easily run, a search to say install Homebrew for Mac. So the first result you see is something from Homebrew. You go to the website, yeah, you basically copy this command, which will help you install Homebrew. And so same thing would happen to if you have a Windows machine, you can just run a quick search, install, I think it's called Chocolate Windows. Can easily go in here and you'll find the command for, yeah, it's this long command, but you don't really need to know the intricate details about this command. But this is exactly what you need. So I guess the next question would be, in order to be able to, for example, install Homebrew or Chocolate, I think one of the very first things will be. So let me just cycle through this again. I think even before, yeah. So the very first step will be to set up the terminal or your shell. So basically, the terminal or shell is just a place for you to run, commands and do your work. And then one quick place to do that will be you can either use a terminal that already comes with the laptop, either Windows or Mac. If it's Windows, you can open up the PowerShell terminal. If it's Mac, I think it comes with a terminal as well that you can start with. Yeah, so in that terminal, you can just run those commands you copy, and you'll be able to install Chocolate or Homebrew. And then you also need to get an editor of choice. My go-to is usually VS Code. You can easily go to the website. For example, if I go back to my browser, um, So I mean, I'll show you several ways to do this. You could say, okay, I don't know how to install VS Code, and you can either go to the website, you know, download. You can say download and install VS Code, but this is typically not the way I would, recommend people to do it. The best way would be once you install, your package manager, then any subsequent installations you need to do. For example, if you need VS Code, you can get that installed, via the package manager. Does anyone else have any questions? Let me just quickly check the the live stream. If you have any questions at this point, you can drop it in the chat, and I'll be able to answer them. So this is for the newbies now, who you know have little to no experience working on real projects. Okay, I'll come back to the chat. If I see any question, I'll be able to answer them. So I'll go back to full screen now. Just cycle through. Yeah, so you install your package manager, then use the package manager to install the VS Code, editor and any extensions that you require. And we can discuss that in more detail. Yeah, you want to set up your terminal. I usually set up my terminal using Z shell. It makes the terminal, look more beautiful, and it gives me more information about my work as well. Then the next step will be to set up Gate for version control, because typically when you work in tech, you will need to be able to interact with version controlled repositories, where it will be the normal place to put any work you've done or any code you've written. And then one step that is good to do would be to configure your cloud profile. So depending on the project, if it's an AWS based project, or an Azure project, or GCP project, um, they all have steps for configuring the cloud profile. Yeah, so the next thing you would want to do is to install the runtime. So depending on the project you're working on, if the project involves um, an application which would usually be written in Java. I mean, most applications, especially if you work on an enterprise level project, they would usually be written in Java. So you'd want to install Java, or if you work on a project that uses Python, you want to install that as well. And then this is quite important. You need to install a VPN client, and because when you work on projects, they are not publicly accessible. So you want to install the VPN client to help you connect to VPN. So that will usually be, you can use OpenVPN. I tend to use Tunnel Blake. These are quite easy to install. Once you've installed, your package manager, you'll be able to install, any subsequent, packages using the package manager. And then one other important thing is to, get an authenticator app on your phone, just because you would always, need to have 2FA on, any, project you work on. So you would need an authenticator app. And we can use the Microsoft, authenticator. I personally use Alti, and it's quite nice as well and easy to use. Then you would also need to have Docker installed, and you can install Docker or Docker Compose using, the package manager. So the first thing I would like to do, the first thing I've always done, install my package manager. Then using the package manager, I install every other packages I need. And then there might be other packages, relevant to the project. You would want to, let's say, talk to your lead, or your other colleagues as well. They'll be able to advise, what other packages you will need. And then you don't need to install this one if you work on a project that allows you to use AI like ChatGPT or Perplexity. You'd want to have an account. And then one important thing is to have a place to make notes. So I tend to use Microsoft OneNote, but you can use other note taking applications as well. Does anyone have any question, or does anyone think I've missed out any um, step that needs to be performed for setting up the laptop? If yes, you can please add a comment in the chat. I'll take a look at the chat now. Okay. So let me open a terminal on my laptop here. So a terminal is just basically a place to run your commands. So I'm using a Windows laptop at the moment. So one terminal for Windows users is the PowerShell. So I'm just going to run it as an administrator, just so that I have um, the permissions I need. So it's just going to say. So I just need to. Yeah. So this is what a PowerShell terminal of Windows look like. Um, you can run Windows commands. So I'm not just going to run. Uh, yeah. So I mean, someone put a comment to say things will go step by step. Mentioned on the slide. Yeah. So by default, and when you have the laptop, if you're given a Windows laptop, it would come with PowerShell terminal installed. Or if you're given a Mac laptop, it will generally come with it's called terminal installed as well. So you can just open that and run any command. Um, okay, if you have any questions, then please let me know. So I'll switch back to the presentation. I'm just going to cycle through all these slides. All right, so this is the second scenario for people with a lot more experience. So typically on project, especially when you work on a public-facing project, there's something called on call. It's basically, for example, in the project I work on, sometimes I go on call. It's just, you logging in, looking at the infrastructure, checking that, everything is all right. If users are, experiencing issues, they'll raise a ticket and, send it your way. And it will be your responsibility to resolve user issues. So let's look at the second scenario. So imagine you're on call now and a ticket comes your way, saying, oh, customers are reporting, the site is partially down, they're clicking on buttons are not working, in short, the whole thing is like a mess, nothing is working. And at the same time, the internal engineers like say other so basically when you work on a project, there are different teams. So you might be on the you know site reliability team, you might be on the platform engineering team. So let's say at the same time, the internal engineers, are complaining, oh, they can access, the site internally as well. They're getting, 5xs errors. They're checking the database. Oh, the CPU usage is quite high. And you're the person on call, they are hoping you'll be able to resolve, you know, the issue. So the question is, how do we resolve this issue? So I'll just go to the next slide quickly. So if you're experienced, you'll be familiar with this kind of architecture. So you have the users on the outside. So I'm just giving more details. I don't know if anyone here, I mean, the experienced people here, if you've come across something called Imperva. If you have, please drop a comment in the in the chat if you have. So you have, the users like the public users outside. Um, you have Imperva, then you have AWS Route 53, then you have an auto scaling group, behind that. You have the applications running on EC2s inside the auto scaling group, and you have the database, which is running at the back end behind the EC2s. So this is just a quick overview of, what the kind of architectures, that can be in place, on projects. So I'll quickly have a look at um, the the comments to see. Has anyone here worked with Imperva, or has anyone here worked on a project? I mean, talking about the experienced people, that utilized this kind of architecture. And this is a simple architecture, and it's quite a common architecture as well. And you would easily find this on most, real world projects. Okay, please drop a comment in the chat. I'll progress. Okay, so send it back to full screen. Yeah, so the question is, where do you begin troubleshooting? Because there are so many layers, Imperva layer, Route 53, auto scaling group, um, EC2. And for this example, or for this scenario, I've chosen an AWS architecture. So I think for subsequent sessions, I'll, introduce Azure and GCP, clouds as well. Um, yeah, so these are some pointers that I think, you know, you want to start troubleshooting, this problem. For example, if some users cannot reach, the website, you want to check if, you can resolve the domain yourself, and that will be using, packages like, dig or NSLOOKUP to see if you can get any IP address, back that belongs to that domain name. And if that works, then okay, that's not where the problem might be. You want to check, for example, the internal engineers will typically connect, via the VPN, and then you want to check if there is whitelisting, present in Imperva that should allow them, access internally. So generally, there are two kinds of users, those trying to connect to the website internally, and those who are completely on the outside, the other public, users. And so that's that. Then you also want to check your Route 53 DNS configuration to see if the records point to the correct alias or a record. You also want to check because typically Route 53 will take the request, and if there's a record pointing to, let's say, a load balancer, for example, we'll just send that request to the load balancer. But if the load balancer is not reachable, then there will be nothing to serve to the user. So you want to check, okay, is the load balancer DNS reachable? So you can do this by using call, against the load balancer DNS name, and if that's where the problem is, then a fix will have to be implemented for that. Sometimes people try to send requests, to the wrong port. If the port is not open on the load balancer listener, then the request would not go through. Then you also want to check if there are any security groups, blocking any, requests. You want to check that as well. Then you want to check if, the auto scaling group, behind the load balancer, if the EC2 instances are, up and running, and if there are no network security groups, blocking any requests or any, network ACLs. Then you also want to check, if there are no, blockages at this point. You also want to confirm, on the EC2 instances, if the service is actually running, if the sockets are open, and you can do that, by checking socket, statistics as well. And then, if the problem isn't there, you want to check if the EC2 instances can connect to the database, so you can check the config, check your connection strings, to see if that's where the issue is. And then the point is, there are so many layers where something can go wrong, and when you're on call, um, it will be your duty to check all these to make sure you're able to pinpoint where the issue is. So I think we'll take a pause here. Let me go and see if there are any questions in the chat. And please drop any comments or question. Okay, doesn't look like we have any question, but these are the sort of this is an example architecture you can come across when you work on a real project. And then so we'll move to the next slide. I think we're almost there now. Yeah, sorry, I have some visitors here. So we are hoping this will, be, the first of many sessions to come, and we'll usually, make announcements on our, social media pages. Um, so we'll appreciate if you could, follow us on YouTube, for example, when we'll schedule more live streams, and we'll be able to, post that information. I think I can just drop this in the chat, so I think it'll be easier for people to easily visit our social media pages. Oh, sorry, I think I copied them. So please, if you could, support us by subscribing on YouTube, or following us on Instagram, that would be very helpful. And then I think that's the end of the taste session. Please, if you have any questions, let us know. If you think we need to do more sessions, for example, to cover,